us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, David. I guess I should go with roll call, please.
Right. Commissioner Barbos,
Here.
Commissioner Willers,
Here.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Here.
and Chair Wellender.
Here.
Thank you.
Very good. Now, at this point, I'm going to invite anybody from the public that wishes to speak to an item not appearing on the agenda. And in so doing, you're welcome to come forward to the mic. Please state your name and address. And although we do have a short agenda this evening, I'm inclined to not start the 3-minute timer, but I would request that you respect the hour. So would anyone like to come forward? Well, seeing none, we'll then move on.
There's also no one on Zoom tonight
Dang.
for
Are we still
public
on?
comment right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it, Matt. Okay, we're going to move on in a review and the acceptance of the agenda. Do we have any comments? I do have one where I'd like to go ahead and make an adjustment. I'd like to move agenda item 8.2 up to the beginning of the public hearing, and then we'll proceed in order as it's stated, 7.1, 7.2, etc. Is that, so with that motion, I need,
Moved and seconded.
okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Yes.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, in terms of correspondence, do we have any late correspondence?
No late correspondence was received.
Thank you. Then we do have one item on the consent calendar. Any comment, or can we go ahead and move with consent on that one item of meeting notes? Mr. Willers.
I make a motion to approve the planning commission meeting minutes of October 20th,
Second.
2022.
Discussion? None? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Yes.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Moving right along into our public hearing, and with the adjustment of our agenda sequence, we're going to then move right into 8.2. And at this point, I would welcome our staff to give us comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Storer, Planning Director. In June of this year, we had a discussion about residential component. There were 4 members of the Planning Commission present, and I think the direction of the Planning Commission was to provide edited changes and have yourself, Mr. Chair, and also Commissioner Willers review those changes. We did that, and as a result of going through some of those changes, determined that it would be appropriate to return to the Planning Commission when perhaps it was a full body complement of the Commission to be able to provide additional input to share that before we return to the City Council. We scheduled it tonight, but due to 2 people being missing, I thought it'd be appropriate to continue it to December the 7th. So that's staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Very good. Any exceptions to staff's recommendation, or can we support that?
Excuse me, sorry, December 15th.
Okay, with that clarification, can we accept staff's recommendation with that continuance? I guess we need a motion to continue.
I'll make a motion to continue to December 15th.
I'll second that motion.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
and Chair Wellender.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
All right, now we're going to get back into the proper sequence, and we're going to pick up on item number 7.1, which is taking possible review discussion for a use permit at 814 Fifth Street West. And at this point, I'd like to welcome a staff report on this, please.
Thank you, Chair Wellender and Planning Commissioners. Yes, this is an application to convert an existing carport to a garage located at 814 Fifth Street West. The project is located on Fifth Street West, near its intersection with Betancourt Street. The project is located in the Central West Planning Area. It's zoned low-density residential, and the project does not raise any issues in terms of consistency with the City of Sonoma general plan. The applicant is proposing to convert an existing 302 square foot carport to a garage. The existing residential structure is non-conforming in terms of the combined setback. A use permit is required to enlarge a structure that is not conforming. Development Code Section 1982.020 BD states that the enlargement, extension, reconstruction, or structural alteration of a structure that is non-conforming only as to height and setback regulations may be allowed with a conditional use permit. If the exterior limits of the new construction do not exceed the applicable height limit or encroach any further into the setbacks than the comparable portions of the existing structure. The zoning requirements for the front yard is a 20-foot front yard setback, and the existing residence is set back 20 feet from the front property line, and no changes are proposed to the existing front yard setback. 20-foot rear yard setback is required, and the existing residence is set back 76 feet from the rear property line. With regard to the side yard setbacks, a 5-foot minimum and 15-foot combined side yard setback is required. The existing non-conforming residence is set back 7 feet from the north side property line and 5 feet from the south side property line, and the existing combined side yard setback is not met. So the project does not meet this requirement, and the applicant is requesting a use permit to allow the garage to be enclosed. The project is not increasing the degree of nonconformity and will not be closer to the property line. In this zoning district, garages shall be set back 5 feet from the front of the primary structure. The existing conforming carport is along the same plane as the front of the residence. With the conversion of the carport to a garage, it will be in line with the primary structure. A use permit is required to allow the garage to be located along the same plane with the existing structure. The maximum coverage in the zone is 40%, and the project has a site coverage of 39%. The floor area ratio is, a requirement is 0.35, and the proposed floor area ratio is 0.27. The maximum building height within this zone is 30 feet, and the garage would have a height of 12 feet. And the design of the addition is intended to be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and employs a horizontal siding and color to match the existing residence. So there are certain findings this commission must make in order to approve this project, and I would note that none of the residences along the east side of 5th Street West meet the combined setback requirement of 15 feet. In addition, there are at least 5 residences in the immediate vicinity that do not comply with the 5-foot garage setback. So staff's recommending that the Planning Commission approve a resolution authorizing the use permit application subject to findings and conditions of approval. That concludes staff's report.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the commissioners to staff? Okay, seeing none, then I'd like to welcome the applicant to come forward if you so wish, and the mic is yours.
Thank you. We are,
I'm sorry, you are?
I am Christine McMillan, and this is Sam McMillan. We live at 814 5th Street West. And we are finishing a remodel. And this last piece, the garage piece, has been the area that has been kind of out of compliance. We are using the exact same footprint that was there in 1954 when the home was built. It just so happens that code has changed over time. The house originally had a garage, and the applicant had changed it to a utility room, and we're just making it back into a garage. So we ask for your approval.
Great. Any questions of the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I will welcome the public to come forward to speak on this item. Would you start the 3 minutes, please? Oh, just kidding.
Hi, my name is Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East. I don't have anything to say about this particular project, but I am curious about what the conditions of approval are as part of this process. Is that something that stands aside from from those different rules up there, or are they related to it, or just curious what the conditions of approval are, and if those lock in that use, or I'm just curious what the conditions of approval are, if someone could explain that.
Yeah, the condition, sorry, the
Please.
Chair, the conditions of approval were uploaded in the Planning Commission packet.
And would the director like to make any further comment about the question that the public made about,
Just that the conditions don't lock in the use, they perfect the implementation of the use that you're giving with the use permit.
okay, and these look typical as we typically have on most of ours, okay. Very good. Anybody on Zoom?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, then having heard that, then we're gonna bring it back, close the public section, and we're gonna bring it back to commissioners for discussion and possible action. Yes,
Looks pretty straightforward to me. I would like to go straight to proposing that we adopt a resolution authorizing the use permit subject to the findings and conditions of approval attached to our agenda item.
is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos?
Yes?
Commissioner Willers?
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick?
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett?
Yes.
And Chair Wellender?
Yes,
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
good luck. Okay, moving right along to agenda item 7.2. This is discussion and consideration for possible action regarding some amendments to our code. So with that, I would welcome staff's report.
This may be the briefest staff presentation you've ever heard. So this is a cleanup ordinance directed by the City Council as we were going through with some general use and standards regulations that we were cleaning up in the council, and we found an inconsistency between a use that's listed in the hillside development versus standards versus in the tables. And so tonight, there's basically 4 basic cleanups that we're doing. Number 1 is to make consistent the definition of duplex. Second is to do that chart change that I just talked about as far as duplexes or single-family homes in a hillside requiring a use permit versus not being principally permitted. Third was to modify corrections in the tables that have got incorrect references, and the last one is to to ensure that affordability and our affordable housing units are in perpetuity. So those are the basic changes that we'll forward to the council. Staff recommends approval of the ordinance. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions for staff? Mr. Willers?
I have a question related to vehicle services and service stations and the siding that's being struck. I don't understand it. I guess I just don't understand why it's being struck. It refers to section 19.3 50.100, which is the description of a service station. So I'm just trying to get a reason why it was being struck. It's on page 10. It's in MX. Yeah, it's an MX zone.
Thank you.
Is that definition provided anywhere else?
That's what I'm looking for right now.
There is a definition and definitions of what a service station is.
Yes.
This refers to the code section of what controls the service station in terms of its implementation. I understand the fact that it's not an allowed use in the MX, but neither is timeshare or vacation rental, and those both are cited as well in the same way. I'm just curious more than anything, so.
Good question.
Wendy just pointed out, it's not even allowed, so why is it giving a reference? So maybe it was just deleted for that reason.
Well, that's true then for vacation rental above and timeshares above and
Right.
storage outdoor, all of those.
We could easily leave it in or take it out, doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I just, my preference is actually if we're gonna leave it, if we're gonna leave the other ones in, leave it in. If we're gonna take it out, take all the other ones out, but just from a practical matter, even though it's not an allowed use, I think the reference to the section of what a service station is helpful to an applicant.
Then we'll leave it in. No
Telling
problem.
you the definition of what you're not allowed to have. Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. All right, at this point, I would like to welcome the public if they wish to come forward and speak to this item 7.2. Please come forward.
Good evening again, Fred Alabak, 19550 8th Street East. Mainly here to pay my respects to Chair Wellender on his last meeting as chair. But I was curious, at the last city council meeting, they sent one back to the planning commission. Is that this one or the one that was continued?
Continue to December.
Okay, so never mind.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then I'll go ahead. Oh, Zoom? Nothing on Zoom?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, then I'll close the public portion and bring it back to the commission. Back to Bill's comment and recommendation about leaving it in. Most of the time, I would be inclined to take out anything extraneous. So if my fellow commissioners are saying it's better to identify something that isn't allowed, then I will be silent. But for the most part, I'm a big fan of if we don't need it, don't put it in. Steve?
Well, as Commissioner Willers mentioned, there's two others right above this, timeshares and vacation rentals, which aren't allowed, and which there's a reference to their definition. And further up, not bed and breakfast, there's one more, outdoor storage, same thing. So either, just for consistency of approach, I think it's helpful, especially somebody might have there might be a question of, does this really constitute a service station or an outdoor storage or what have you? It's nice for somebody to just be able to look it up. So
Okay.
I'd like to leave them in.
Okay, that's fine.
I would second that. I think it's helpful.
Well, good. Any more discussion, or can I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to, let's see. Of course, no one took it because it's so long. I'll make a motion to approve amending the amending the municipal code, Title 14, Section 14.27.030. Changes to duplex, and 19.92, Title 19, Chapter 19.10, zones and allowable uses to ensure consistency between 19.10 and 19.40050 hillside development regarding the requirements for single-family residents to obtain a use permit in the hillside residential RS zoning district, and other minor corrections and amendments to Section 14 or 19.44.060, continued availability, and to clarify the terms of affordability and finding such amendments exempt from the California Code, with that minor modification as accepted by the commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
All right. We are now fast approaching our last item, 8.1. As I understand it, at the end of this presentation, all of our parking problems will be solved. Anyway, so we're here, discuss and consider the possible action to forward a recommendation to the City Council regarding adoption of the draft of the Downtown Parking Management Plan. And with that, I would welcome our consultant, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, if I can introduce Brian to you, from W-Trans. Brian has made a presentation to the City Council. If I can just give you a little bit of background and context, and then Brian can take it from there. In 2017, W-Trans, with whom Brian works, prepared a downtown parking management study, which analyzed parking impacts on-street and off-street in Sonoma, and used 2014 data. Here we are, fast forward to today, we have a situation where the direction was to relook at the issues. In our staff determination, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to reinvent that piece of the wheel, or even the wheel at all, to figure out if there was an issue in the downtown area. It was basically, Houston, we have a problem, let's go figure out solutions rather than getting more data. You just do a windshield survey and you figure that one out. So what Brian did is prepared an update to that 2017 study without going back into the histrionics, if you will. And basically the foundation of the report that you'll hear in a few moments talks about implementation measures in phases, those that can be done little cost, no cost, and those that require a little bit more thinking about it. So when we went to the City Council with the presentation, we received direction to come to your commission for direction or some assistance on trying to figure out which of the phase 1 and phase 2s are good, better, or indifferent, which ones you think will have the best impact. And you've certainly seen some of the articles in the newspaper regarding just one of those solutions or implementation measures. So with that, I'll introduce again Brian, and he'll be able to take forward with the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, David. I will dive right in here. So David's already done a great job of introducing me in some of the history here, so I'll skim through these first few slides pretty quickly. But again, we're essentially building on a draft study from 2017. We had our admin draft dated back in May, and now we're on the draft version of the report. And as David said, you know, the plan, we're trying to update essentially the original work that was done using what we know now, but not focus necessarily on whether we have a problem, but the fact really focusing on the solutions at hand, the potential strategies that we have. And so again, this is exactly what David covered before in terms of trying to identify what the deficiencies are and provide solutions moving forward. So this was the survey area that was looked back in 2014, and some people, I'll address a potential question right now about whether is 2014 data still relevant to today, and I would say yes, it is. 2014, if you look at actually parking demand compared to then, compared to now, or even 2019 pre-pandemic, it was actually very strong. So it's actually relatively reliable data. And as we'll see when we walk through here, you'll see even back then, the plaza was pretty full, and that you have lots of parking. But as David mentioned here, the survey itself looked at all of the on-street spaces from about the bike path in the north down to Patton Street and then 2nd Street to 2nd Street. It also looked at the two primary public parking lots in their area, the Casa Grande lot and the other lot off of East Napa Street. It did not look at it did not do any surveying of private lots, even though there are off-street private lots in the area. And this is just another picture of that same thing. So total captured parking in the area is a little over 800 spaces, almost 840 spaces, of which about 660 are on street, which for a lot of historic downtowns is considerable. And that's actually a really, I would just say that's a strong asset to have, because when you look at a parking pool and you look at the parking available, you ideally want as much of that parking to be publicly accessible as possible, right? Nothing drives people more crazy, myself included, than looking for a parking spot and seeing an off-street parking lot that a bank has that no one can park in after hours. So the fact that you do have a large supply of public parking, both on-street and off-street, is to the downtown's advantage. Not to say it's not well used, but it's to your advantage. So looking at kind of where we went back and looked at the data from 2014 that was in the 2017 study, we noticed some things, some kind of what we call key findings here that you can take away from this. One is that on-street parking in the area is very heavily utilized. Again, I'm sure this is not surprising to you at all. But again, as is typical of many downtowns that rely on time limits for turnover, a lot of the spaces they're very likely used by downtown employees who do, in most towns, what you call the 2-hour shuffle. Here would be the 3-hour shuffle of constantly moving your cars around to avoid a ticket. The peak demand, when you look at the downtown as a whole, when you actually look at the data, very much peaks on the weekends, again, not surprisingly, but also during weekday evenings. So you'll get kind of especially Thursday, Friday nights, when you get a lot of the bars and restaurants that are hopping. You do have, during special events, some spillover parking in the residential neighborhoods around there, and just, on busy nights or busy days as well. We did notice that some people had noted the need for passenger pickup, drop-off areas in the downtown. There's really no space for that. It kind of happens willy-nilly, as I'd say. And so that's one of the concerns, as well as the time limits not being respected. So there's not a lot of enforcement in the downtown, and it seems to be relatively widely known that you can stay longer than time limits quite often. And so looking back at the conclusions recommendation from the 2017 study, again, it said a lot of the same sorts of things, that you have very heavy utilization during certain times, weekends and weekday evenings, and it generally, during those times, it exceeds with this kind of generic threshold that we use in the industry of 85%. If you have a block and it's at least 85% full or more, it's considered full. Because it's very difficult to be able to find a spot at that point. The other conclusions that they drew from the previous study, again, that was just a draft study from 2017, looked at things like increasing parking enforcement to try to encourage turnover and encourage compliance with time limits, looking at public-private partnerships, which we'll talk about more in a second, and also looking at the Casa Grande lot. That is by far your largest lot that you have in the downtown. Unfortunately, it's not owned by the city. It's owned by state parks. But being able to work with state parks to come up with some sort of arrangement that was mutually beneficial. In addition, it also recommended looking at the time limits for the downtown, looking at residential special event permits, and also discuss the idea of paid parking in the downtown. And lastly, it also talked about not only special event permits, but what is generally referred to as an RPP, a residential parking permit district, around the downtown if residents felt that spillover was really occurring in their neighborhoods. And also looking at potential new public parking facilities downtown, or is there any opportunity to expand? Of course, we're in a historic downtown, space is very limited. And so being able to find new land for new parking can be difficult. And frankly, oftentimes the city has to make a determination about whether that's the highest and best use for that land. So I apologize, this actually should say draft study, not admin draft study. But again, the idea here is that we know that there's a high demand of spaces for the downtown. And we're really trying to look forward to the future to see how we can best accommodate it during these peak times. Okay, so now getting into more of the meat of the subject. We kind of got through the beginning part. So when we look at parking management and parking planning, historically throughout a lot of the second half of the 20th century in particular, when cities said, how do we solve this problem? Oftentimes their solution was just to build a parking garage or build something. And they would say, gosh, people are getting upset because there's not enough parking. We need more parking. But the problem with that is it doesn't really address the actual problem, which is that everyone wants to park in the same places, right? So everyone wants to park, for example, here on the plaza. And building a parking structure somewhere else doesn't necessarily solve that problem. And so the goal of park demand management is to try to find a way to ensure availability so that when people want to go look for a space, there is one available, whether you are a resident, whether you're an employee, or whether you're a visitor to the area. And so we came up with kind of a whole host of goals and objectives, which looks like a lot of text on this screen, so I'll kind of summarize some of the finer points here. But some of the things that we're aiming to do as part of this plan, A, is to really take advantage of your current resources, right? You have a lot of spaces out there. Some of them are very heavily used, some others are less so. So how can we get essentially the most bang for your buck out of this? Parking can be very expensive, both in terms of construction and maintenance. So how do we best utilize what we have? Looking at the rules and regulations of parking downtown to make it as inviting for everyone, both residents, employees, and visitors. The last thing you want to do is develop a system that drives people away. And so how do you do that while accommodating peak demand? Getting employees to utilize and long-term parkers to utilize other spaces. They're not the prime on-street spaces. If you're parking for 8 hours at a time, it's not beneficial for anyone, not for the shops or other people, for them to be parking right in front of stores that are best suited for patrons and other visitors. At the same time, realizing that when you implement solutions, you don't want to create new problems. And there's already a spillover issue into some of the neighboring residential neighborhoods, and we wouldn't want to exacerbate that. So we want to make sure that whatever we're recommending here works for the downtown and for the neighborhoods around it. And as I said, basically coming up with strategies that address both short-term parkers, whether you're coming for an hour or whether you're coming all day. And so here is our Christmas tree toolbox of measures. The measures on the left, and you can see there's a break there between parking benefit district and parking pricing. The first set of strategies is what we're calling phase 1. The second set is phase 2. The 3 columns are essentially trying to rank these strategies in terms of strategy effectiveness, its cost, and its ease of implementation. 5 being good and 1 being bad, so to speak. So the 5s are all in red, the 4s are in green. That means generally good things. We structured these strategies in this way such that, and what's recommended in the plan is to proceed with phase 1 strategies and see if that essentially solves the problem in downtown. If problems persist, then moving on to other phase 2 strategies. Because as you can see, this phase 1 strategy that we have here, you'll see a lot of the colors, the red and green, on the ease of implementation. These are things that are relatively easy to implement. They're not very costly. They are good at managing demand. As you get into phase 2 strategies, you're getting into things that are not as easy to implement and that are moderately costly, but can be very effective if you need them. And that's why we set up this sort of phased approach to the program. So you don't try to throw the whole kitchen sink at it at once, but go with certain sets of strategies to see how, if you can solve the problem in the most cost-effective way. So, to elaborate now on what these strategies are, in the phase 1 strategies, you have parking enforcement that can be done through better technology. So right now, the technology here in town is still relatively rudimentary. A lot of towns across the country still, chalk tires or do things of that sort. More and more communities have moved on to license. Okay.
We're busted.
We're busted, yes. Move on to what we call LPR, license plate recognition, such that vehicles can simply a police vehicle can drive down the street and just pass by cars and we'll know how long they've been parked there once they've made a couple of rounds. There's some capital costs up front with it, but it saves immensely on labor costs. This technology has been around now for heavily used for at least 10, 15 years, so it is well established and well used by large institutions. 2 is working with the state parks. So we did meet with state parks some months ago and talked with them regarding the state of the Casa Grande lot and the potential for trying to broker some agreement with state parks to potentially restripe the lot to gain more spaces or potentially expand the lot into their property a little bit more. I think that's still under discussion. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any updates on that, but state parks did notify us during those conversations that their plan is to price the lot early in 2023. So that was, just throwing that out there as background information. The third piece is wayfinding signage. Again, this is relatively inexpensive. There is some wayfinding signage around the downtown. Some of it is newer. But you could also, if desired, you could pursue real-time availability, for example, for large lots. So when people come into town, they say, gosh, there's 50 spaces available in the Casa Grande lot. I should make my way over there. Introducing passenger loading zones. So we have identified some areas within the downtown where you could really direct either individual passengers or Lyfts and Ubers to be able to drop off and pick up passengers. And the last is shared parking opportunities. And this is a strategy that is being implemented more frequently now, but it's still a little bit less known. And essentially what it is working with private lot owners who have their spaces available at whatever times of day work for them to make those spaces publicly accessible. So if you are a business and you close at 5 o'clock on a Thursday and you are willing to open your lot so that the public may park there in the evening when people are there for restaurants, then normally what ends up happening is the city will broker agreements with those private lot owners regarding finances, liability, and so forth. If you go to some places like the city of Sacramento, they have literally, I think, about 100 lots with which they do this.
Brian, can I just interject?
Yes.
On this particular diagram, Brian has been talking about Casa Grande, and what he said is accurate about that, but I do want to point out Lot B. It's off there just to the north side of East Napa Street, and it's either going to be 36 or 37 spaces, depending on the count. I don't know. It's one or the other. But that lot is a city-owned lot, and if you were to go there now, I would venture to say that there's probably about 15 to 20 cars that are business related, and so that's another asset that we have, but clearly the bang for the buck is with the Casa Grande relationship.
All right, thank you, David. The remainder of the phase 1 strategies, the first one has to do with the time limits themselves. When we looked at the time limits, and we've seen public feedback both ways regarding the 3 hours versus 2 hours, and there can be cases made for either one. At the end of the day, again, part of our objectives here are to create an environment that welcomes people and keeps them downtown. oftentimes time limits will have the inadvertent effect of driving people away, right? They'll be worried they're going to get a ticket. Well, I would stay for that extra coffee instead I'm going to get my car and leave. So our recommendation as part of this report is to maintain the 3-hour time limits, but extend them to 8 p.m. at night. Because frankly, that's a lot of when your primary activity is happening downtown with bars and restaurants. One of the issues that we see right now that's likely happening is employees who come, for example, at 3 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon, they come for an evening shift. And they basically can park on street and leave their car overnight. And also there's no enforcement of Sunday right now. So if you come on a Sunday, which I have frequently, it's very difficult to find a spot downtown. And so the recommendation is to actually have the time limits be in effect 7 days a week. We also looked at from a kind of multimodal perspective. So, being able to encourage people, for example, to bike downtown. There are, bike parking locations in the downtown. Some of them look a little mysterious to me because they look like a little more like public art. But part of our recommendation is to produce a little bit more so that are more easily accessible near businesses where people frequent. In addition, looking at a bike valet program. If you see these generally more now like in Oakland and some closer to larger cities, but essentially during special events, they have these valet operations. Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition actually operates them, and they do them here in Sonoma County. And then lastly here, to look into what we call a parking benefit district. And what that is essentially designating a certain area, in this case the downtown, and saying whatever fees you happen to generate within that area related to transportation, you keep within the downtown. So if you have if you have sort of in lieu fees, if you have parking fees, if you have whatever fees they happen to be, you keep them in that district proper. And what that does is it creates incentives for the local businesses to participate in the process, because they actually, as part of the parking benefit district, oftentimes it's a public-private partnership in terms of deciding how those funds are spent. So those are the phase 1 strategies. All right. Phase 2 strategies now. Everyone's favorite, of course, the one that gets the most press, is the meters, on-street meters. And people feel very strongly about this one way or another, and I completely understand why. Parking meters are one of the best ways to regulate parking demand, right? It's one of the best ways to be able to shift behavior. With normal time limits, employees generally are not, even if you have a 3-hour time limit, or a 2-hour time limit, you'll still see a 2 or 3 hour shuffle occur. And you can price based on demand. So if your price is too high and you have a lot of empty spaces, you can drop the price to a quarter an hour, something along those lines. You also can price only at certain times if you wish. You could price only on weekends or only during certain times when there's peak is high. Again, people feel very strongly about parking meters, and there's other things involved in terms of, some people have commented not only here but in other communities about the kind of the impact it has on the feeling of the community, for example, and concerns about whether or not it will drive away business, which is again why you regulate based on price. Again, these are strategies though that we recommend at phase 2, so it's something to consider. Similarly, if parking meters were considered for the downtown, that the city also consider what we call a resident parking meter permit. So the picture that is shown here is actually what's in effect in Mill Valley, which is the resident shopper visitor permit, which they really cleverly called the RSVP. And has been around for several years. I'm actually originally from Mill Valley, so that's why I know it well. But essentially it means that you can, as a resident or a shopper or visitor, can park free at any of the meters downtown for the year. I think the permit costs, $50 or $60 a year. In addition, looking at, again, returning back to the residential parking permit, if residents around the downtown felt that spillover was an issue, to explore creating a permit program. And again, these RPP programs are really, the need is determined by the residents themselves, and generally they vote for it or not. So it's certainly not something that would be imposed. Fourth would be an employee parking permit program. So basically designating certain spots within the downtown where you can say, employees, this is really where we want you to park. Generally, what you want are long-term employees parking in, frankly, less convenient spaces. Nothing that's not safe. You don't want employees feeling unsafe if they're having to walk back to their vehicles at night, for example. But places where employees maybe walk a block or two to their cars, but also know that they can find a spot when they need it. So that they know those spots are for us and the general public is not going to park there. And then lastly, creating a universal valet parking program for special events. You know, some places do this where essentially you can pick up and drop off your car, and only really for big events, where you can drop it off anywhere in the downtown. You're given a key fob, for example, or I don't know, that's maybe a little dated now, a ping on your app. And you can pick up your vehicle wherever you need to in the downtown. So again, something just thinking through, again, that's occurs much less frequently, only during large special events. So, we are, I think, at the end of the presentation here. This is a little history of here working with the state parks. Oh, that's where it goes. Sorry, I'm running two screens here. So we are at the point now of presenting the study to you here at the Planning Commission. We'd like to get your thoughts and recommendations about what you think of the different strategies. Happy to answer any questions, and at some point bring this to council.
Thank you. I trust I should solicit comment from the public before we.
I just had a comment, and that just talks about calendar. We obviously have one more commission meeting of this commission, or this body, if you will, of members. And then certainly we have a new city council, so depending on how much you want to talk about it tonight versus maybe even continue it with two more commissioners coming in December. Certainly we wanted to introduce this topic so that we could at least get this commission's input. You've got a lot of experience with the downtown area, as I'm sure new commissioners will, but I think there's value in having your input of this body. Whether it's tonight, whether it's, or it can be tonight and also in December if we wanted to do that. But we also ultimately want to get to the city council at some point in the beginning of the next year, the first quarter, certainly. Thank you.
Well, with those comments, my inclination is to go ahead and have a healthy discussion this evening, but to also continue it to the 15th in order to allow for the other two commissioners that are not here tonight. That would be my vote, but I'm also welcome to comments. So,
I was going to say, there's a lot of information. We did give them the 14 study, the 17 study, I believe.
Yes, that was
and then we also gave you the current one too, so there's a lot of information to digest.
Yeah.
So now, I will go back to the question I raised. It's appropriate to open up to the public. I will then open it up to the public for a comment.
Oop, oh. Yeah.
Beat Mr. Frank to the punch. Fred Hollabach back again. I have a number of thoughts here. First of all, I object to the license plate recognition program. That I just don't think we need any more kind of surveillance state kind of a situation, and that, you know, I just that rubs me the wrong way to have that kind of surveillance. You know, if you're gonna, you should be able to do some good old-fashioned cheating and get away with it, and not have them surveil you like that. The Casa Grande lot has been a situation where people have been talking about that for years, and so I don't understand like why now all of a sudden that would work when it hasn't worked for all these other years. So I don't have a lot of faith that something's going to move on that when it hasn't moved for so long and there's been parking issues. So that's my thoughts on that. Now, in the past, I remember I had conversations with Larry, or Larry mentioned using the post office lot and maybe having the post office on the first floor and then having like a two-story garage over that. And so that's an equal distance from the plaza as the Casa Grande lot, and that would be a highest and best use, and it would be similar to the Petaluma parking garage where it's close to downtown. So I don't necessarily think that the parking garage is a false hope. if the Casa Grande lot would be, equally distant. So, I think that's worth pursuing with the owner of that property and make a proposal. And, you could put a nice parking garage with murals on it or something. And, I think that might possibly work out. Let's see, and so tourism is really the big cash cow of Sonoma, and so to have a dedicated parking garage close to the plaza like that, I think would be a good idea. As far as spillover parking, I work for people on 2nd Street East, and I'm trying to get in my truck, and there's a constant traffic coming by. I'm being, threatened of being clipped getting into my truck for all the people kind of circling around the plaza trying to figure out where to park. So I think that the parking permit system would be something that the people on 2nd Street East would like. That's just a few thoughts that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. Mr. Frank?
Good evening, everyone. Robert Frank, Larkin Drive. There's another parking lot that has been overlooked so far, and that's our egresses out of town. When the traffic backs up, as people are trying to evacuate, you have a blockade that goes from the Shell Vista Fire Department all the way to the Union 76 station. And it is a hemorrhage point that serves to disincentivize, inhibits future repeat travel here. Think back to Sausalito, for example, where their tourism traffic would back up to the Golden Gate Bridge. Another parking lot. Sometimes you don't have to evacuate your car in order to park your car. It's just so overwhelmed that, the traffic is constipated. So I think we've achieved, relative to the parking, we've achieved something of an equilibrium point in that. Look at our joint. They're at 20264 Broadway. Our numbers have remained constant for years. And it's a pretty good bellwether, if I do say so myself, for the tourism pulse of the rest of the community. So at any rate, again, you have massive, massive parking as people try to egress from this community on Saturday afternoons, Sunday afternoons, and holiday days too. And I think that's about it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody on Zoom?
Yes, we have 2.
Okay.
We're going to start with Karen.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. Hello, my name is Karen Rosenberg, and I'm a Resilience Associate with Greenbelt Alliance. Greenbelt supports the strategies proposed by the City of Sonoma to help better assist with transportation demand management. Our team acknowledges that the city has made strong commitments to combat climate change, but believe that in order to do so, the city needs to change the status quo in regards to the transportation sector. Parking lots tend to be large, paved areas that increase polluted stormwater runoff, negatively impacting water quality in Sonoma's creeks and rivers. It also reduces the livability of cities, decreases walkability, and takes up space that could better serve the community. Sonoma is seeking to be a leader in climate action, but if you are still subsidizing parking, we will not be able to meet our climate goals. We are raising money to fund more affordable housing, but cities and developers are running into challenges with these antiquated parking requirements. This means we are getting less housing and even less affordable housing. The average cost for one parking space on a surface lot is $38,800, and for an underground parking lot, it is $96,000 per parking space. Developers can pass on the cost to residents. Professor C.J. Gabe finds tenants spend 17% of their rent on parking, which particularly hurts folks who are low income and or don't own a car. We are in strong favor of the city implementing a parking benefit district, which can effectively manage parking supply and demand while also ensuring the revenue collected is directly reinvested into neighborhood improvements. The city should also consider promoting such parking apps as Park Aid, which can help manage the occupancy and revenue inflow and outflow for residential and commercial properties. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to continuing to engage with you on this topic.
Thank you, Karen.
We're going to go with Callum Weeks right now, and you okay, Callum, I might have to unmute yourself, but you should be good to go.
Well, panelists now. Good evening, Chair Wellender, commissioners, and staff. I'll actually be keeping my remarks quite brief because Karen actually knocked out of the park with that entire statement. I would just like to echo everything that she said, and I think this is one of the rare occasions where I come into disagreement with Fred on the parking structures. That there should always be, if at all possible, a strong emphasis on transportation demand management, implementing every tool we possibly can that avoids the cost and the impacts that additional parking actually levies against communities. And so again, I would just like to reiterate and emphasize in +1 everything Ms. Rosenberg just said, and encourage the city council to keep, the planning commissioners to continue advancing really innovative and thoughtful approaches to better managing the community and seeking more sustainable opportunities to carve a path forward for affordable housing and just housing generally. So thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Callum.
And there are no more members on Zoom with their hands raised.
And seeing no more movement from the public, I'm going to close the public portion and bring it back to my commissioners for some deliberation. Mr. Barnett.
Thank you, Chair Wellender. Well, I don't quote Yogi Berra very often, but I'm having the experience of deja vu all over again. The first plaza parking study that I recall was in the early 90s. It had been conducted by interns at Sonoma State. And lo and behold, its conclusions included that 50% of the cars parked on the plaza are employee of the cars of the employees of the plaza businesses. So we have been looking at some of these very same issues now for 30 plus years. And I have looked at, in my time on the council, probably another 3 parking studies in addition to yours, all of which have addressed the same issues and come to many of the same conclusions. To a certain extent, the environment surrounding parking has changed. The time when I was on the city council, we had a lease with the Casa Grande parking lot, and it was not difficult to negotiate. I don't know exactly why it was after that lease expired, and I was off the council by then, it became a virtual impossibility to negotiate a new agreement. And it's been a long time that there's been no agreement.
Yeah, you spoiled my thunder. I was going to just talk about that before you started speaking. I just want to kind of give an update. Can I just do that?
Sure.
Commissioner Barnett? Wendy, how do we get that up there on the screen real quick? Oh. We just need to, we're going to show you the Casa Grande lot, and I'll give you an update as to our meeting in July. The Brian.
July past or July?
July past of this year, yeah. There we go. Oh, we had it. We had it.
Darn it.
Will this make us feel better or worse?
Better, much better. It's getting to the question of, comment of the lease. I just want to kind of explain a little bit behind State Parks' mindset.
All right, there you are.
There we go. Thank you. And so we met with State Parks July 19th or thereabouts. And they've had a master plan in effect for a few years now where they want to build onto the northwesterly portion of the property. You'll see that it's separated with a row of trees paralleling First Street West. You'll see that area there. I don't know how I could just point it out, but it's the green stuff. To the west, yeah, there we go. Thank you,
Yes,
Brian.
and the portion abutting the street actually belongs to the Dunlap family.
Correct.
The portion you're talking about is a relatively square area.
Yeah,
Which
right
if,
there.
which if I understand it, they want to use to create a facility to house particular artifacts.
Archives and artifacts, and
Yes.
as an administration building, they actually have plans for it. And when we spoke with them, and going back to your comment, and then I'll be quiet. It was 10 years ago that we'd had a 10-year lease. So, we even had them, it sounds like, even beyond that time. And for whatever reason, 10 years ago, it was decided not to go. In our discussions as a staff, we thought it might, regarding the payment of a lease for that lot, it's not inexpensive, it's quite expensive to have the ability to have control of that land, but only to the extent that we're not able to make any improvements. And as Brian was talking about, you see the dog bone there. There are more efficient ways to provide additional parking and also then help toward or facilitate the archive and artifact building that they want to build. And so we were talking about that rather than put money into a lease, which is a sunk cost, take that same money and put it into improvements, whether it's restriping, resurfacing, whatever, and then helping them get toward their end goal as well. So I just wanted to talk about that specifically because we, as Brian said, we learned for the first time that within 6 months from July, they were to be implementing a paid parking program, whereas today is free. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, David. Well, with reference to the Casa Grande lot, interestingly enough, my first civic engagement had to do with the Casa Grande parking lot in 1992, at which time there were no signs around the plaza that indicated there was free parking available. So I approached the council and got permission to both design and indicate the wording for signs that would direct cars to free all-day parking. And that began with the long journey of civic engagement for me. The fact that the Casa Grande parking lot is going to become paid, and we don't know what fee structure they have in mind, is really a huge change, because directing cars to that lot because it's free and had no time limit was an essential ingredient to the basic parking strategy for downtown. As inefficient as that lot is, and it is terribly inefficient as it's currently laid out, I think you could get 25% more cars in there if it was restructured. Nonetheless, it was a tremendous asset in terms of reducing the pressure of parking downtown. And its loss as free parking to me is monumental. And it places the city in a situation of a lack of parity with the state and that parking lot. And the differential as such is going to exacerbate the problem we have. It's going to discourage people from parking where we've been encouraging them to park. And now all of a sudden we're going to have even more increased demand for the free parking that we will now have on the plaza if it doesn't become paid parking. In the past, when the subject of parking fines and revenues from parking was discussed, and this was particularly in the area of enforcement, there were a lot of discussions even when I was on the council about the potential revenue from parking fines. My recollection of those discussion was because the implementation of the collection of those fines had to be done through a contract with an outside agency. The reality at that time was that the percentage of the revenue from a parking fine actually coming to the city of Sonoma was tiny. And the bulk of the money was being used for the processing and collection process of collecting those fines and as revenues. The other big change over time that's happened, in addition to this potential of the Casa Grande lot, because all the other things you've identified, the private parking light, public, private, all of that's been discussed for 25, 30 years. With all of the same conditions and problems and hindrances and hesitations on the part of the businesses. And as we can see, despite the introduction of that concept so many years ago, it still hasn't been implemented. And it hasn't been implemented because the property owners don't want to either give up their private parking, or they don't want to be at risk for liability issues, because even if the city indemnifies these parking lot owners with an indemnification agreement, indemnifying them against any costs or actions or expense contingent with lawsuits that occur because of accidents or difficulties in the lot. The fact is, life being what it is and the law being what it is, that if there is a serious accident and someone's hurt, everybody's going to get sued, indemnification or not. And so there has been absolutely no willingness on the part of private parking space owners to enter into these agreements. And we've put in, I don't know how many hours in the past formulating the ideas and exploring them, only to have absolutely nothing happen. So the other big change is the technology. In the past, discussions always had to do with meters and physical meters and feeding meters, and all of that, as you have noted, is now obsolete and can be replaced with, as Mr. Allback notes, a greater degree of surveillance, and which, you know, has its pluses and its minuses. A parking district, which I think is a fine idea and has been bounced around for 20 years, of course, is only as useful as the revenues that fund it. And depending on parking fee revenue to fund the district, I think will end up being relatively small amount of money compared to what a district would be expected to do. I think a further consideration in the creation of a district is actually requiring the businesses located within that district to have a yearly assessment, perhaps on their property tax bill or some other vehicle, their business license tax that has to be renewed yearly. Incidentally, the business license tax hasn't been updated in well over a decade in terms of how much we charge businesses for their business licenses. Why that's not incremental to inflation or other factors, I don't know, but there's a missed opportunity there, kind of like the park fees that got lost for 10 years. For the benefit district to have any wherewithal in either the creation of additional lots or the implementation of costly new technologies or other things, really has to do with projections on what those revenues are. And so, once again, you know, it's a commitment that I don't know if the city's going to be prepared to make. I think the loading zone idea is a good idea, and that's probably the easiest one on the list. We've got a horseshoe on the plaza, which functions relatively smoothly, has very little traffic coming into it, and we could create white curbed loading zones on both sides of, except for where the bus the buses load on one side. On the other side of that horseshoe, we could create a drop-off, and it would basically put people a half a block from any place on the plaza. I mean, if the concept of a passenger loading zone is that they have to be attendant specifically to the businesses nearby, that's an antiquated notion, and frankly, the obesity rates in America might be helped with a half a block walk on the part of people who are getting out of their cars. I think the other feature, and I don't really know what the import of this is in terms of the whole discussion, but if you look at the plaza as a kind of a living thing, it's got its own metabolism. And the metabolism of the plaza has to do with automobiles and visitors and the money that flows from the visitors who come here in their automobiles. That's basically the energy source for the metabolism of the plaza. The way the plaza is now, and given the number of spaces that you've noted, and what will be the effect of the Casa Grande change, it essentially brings with it what I would refer to as a natural carrying capacity for that downtown district. Now, because the nature of the metabolism of businesses is that we want to engorge ourselves on as much opportunity as possible. We want as much business. We want nothing that's going to interfere with our private metabolism of money coming in from visitors and residents into our businesses. They're a force that dictates against a carrying capacity. They don't want a carrying capacity. Any proposals in the past, even like the parklets or converting the plaza to a more pedestrian-friendly area with a limiting parking on, for example, one outside perimeter of the plaza, has been objected to by businesses as we're going to interfere with their financial metabolism. But the fact is that the carrying capacity also acts as an appropriate limiting factor so that the downtown area doesn't become bloated. And the idea of coming up with an unlimited carrying capacity for the plaza will just simply result in a form of bloated gridlock. Do I want to see a situation where we're discouraging people from coming to Sonoma? Do we want? No, there's a part of me that rebels against that. But there's also a part of me that recognizes that that's not unhealthy. That the carrying capacity of a community means something. That the infrastructure can only support so much, and when you exceed that carrying capacity, it becomes uncomfortable for everybody. So I understand that, the parking is limited and we can only carry as a certain capacity of cars. And on one sense, that's good, and in another sense, it's not. But it is the reality of the situation. And sometimes I've had the fantasy that if you were starting the plaza all over, and if you didn't want to have a carrying capacity difficulty, you would basically excavate underneath City Hall, and the whole area underneath the plaza would become like Union Square in San Francisco, a multi-level underground parking garage with a tunnel that leads in off Broadway. And you would just drive from Broadway, go down the tunnel, and travel down 2, 3, or 4 stories and park. But of course, what that would do was that would blow the carrying capacity of the plaza just out of the water. It would be a terrible idea. It's an awful idea. So the financial benefit is real to having a vibrant downtown and a vibrant downtown economy. And you want to encourage it. By the same token, you want to balance that so that it actually remains a pleasant place to be. I mean, you don't want people showing up at the plaza and then finding out that they can't get in anywhere because everything's full. That doesn't actually do anybody any good. And so I do think that accepting the fact of a carrying capacity is also part of the formula, and to imagine being able to have an unlimited carrying capacity by expanding parking opportunities or different kinds of parking opportunities in the area surrounding the plaza may just simply result in this bloating effect that I'm talking about. It's certainly worth discussing. The last thing I will say is about bikes. There's a lot of discussion about bikes when Broadway was restriped to accommodate bikes. There was a tremendous push from biking coalitions to approve biking plans, and indeed a bike lane was created on Broadway. Now, I'm a huge walker. I walk every day. I probably cross Broadway 5 times a week in both directions. I almost never see a bicycle, despite the clamor of the bicycling community who came here in droves to convince the city council to do it. The materializing of a vast population of bicyclists has not happened, not that I've been able to witness. So I don't think focusing too much on bikes and bike valets and the rest of it is going to produce, in what is essentially a aging population in a city with an average age today of something like 53, to all of a sudden be hopping on their bicycles to come downtown so they can have access. I think bikes are great. Bill's a bike rider, and I don't know about the rest of you. I gave up my bike a while ago. I think it's fine to include it, but I wouldn't like to see a huge amount of effort or time put on it, although I'm sure I'll hear from all the bicycle enthusiasts after these comments. I don't know what to do about the employee parking. This is the one piece that's never been solved. And I don't know if it is solvable.
That's it.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask a question of Brian here because you've made me think about something. Is it supply and demand? But if there was a problem, we would hear it, would we not, from the businesses? So they must be able to be, they're in the mind, I'm thinking, they must be of a mind that there is no problem. Otherwise, City Hall would be hearing about it. So at what point do we say, notwithstanding the fact that, yes, it's 85% on weekends and the like, at what point do they get to a point saying that 85% is or is not a problem? Right now, without them, with pitchforks coming to City Hall and council meetings, is there no problem?
Well, if I can just take a minute, the greatest comments I heard about a problem with parking was a parklet-related concern and I had numerous conversations with merchants in the plaza who were not restaurants, who were simply retail merchants, who felt that they had been strongly impacted by the reduction in parking spaces because of the parklets. And I know a number of them are quite relieved to have the plaza now largely returned to its normal configuration. So there was some barking, and because there was a dramatic decrease in parking spots.
Was that also pre-pandemic though?
No, it was parklet. So the parklets were a response to the pandemic. So you can't say it was pre-pandemic. And no, I had not heard merchants complaining about unavailability of parking prior to the pandemic and the parklets, not generally.
So then I guess it raises the question of what caused the need for the 2017 study if there was no issue?
That was my next question. Was there a particular impetus for conducting this analysis this time?
Well, again, we didn't do any number crunching. That was not the task. It was to try to assume that there was one, because in 2017 there was, and I suspect that as time goes on, your problem doesn't get any, we haven't done anything to alleviate the problem, right? We haven't built a parking lot or gone underground. The improvements are what they are today. So has our desire for use of the automobile gone down? I don't think so. So it raises the fundamental question of, is there a need for us to solve a problem that's possibly not a problem?
Well, 2 comments before I open it back up. I think the perception by all merchants that wrap the plaza is parking is holy and should never be touched. And I think part of the response from the parklets was, oh my goodness, they've encroached upon the parking. So there was a mindset, I think, right there that says, we don't have much, it's working now, but by golly, they better not take it away. I also believe that this study is going to be good because if this new council goes forward and truly does take seriously the idea of revisiting the overall conceptual downtown as far as this kind of master plan, one of the key components is going to be, okay, how is this going to impact the parking? Are we generating more flow or more demand, or what have we taken away, and how can we make up for what apparently was the equilibrium or the right quantity? So I think even though I think the study will be good in my eyes, as far as going forward, because of at least the direction that we may be looking at in the next few years about, revisiting the downtown and how do we keep it vibrant.
So theoretically, if there's not a problem now, there will be when the state invokes parking at Casa Grande. So that's what we found ourselves as a staff is saying, okay, look, if that move is made, we have to respond. Because if we don't, those cars in theory are going to come back onto our streets and create the problem that Parklets has created.
So I'm going to go to our youngest commissioner and say it is your turn to talk.
I have a question to start out. What does the latest and greatest in paid parking look like? The least intrusive. It's a hot button issue. Nobody likes the aesthetic of your, clink and twist parking meter. But what is the latest and greatest that other places are doing that works?
Sure. So I'll say everyone approaches this a little differently. There's no right way of doing it, right? Because there's going to be pros and cons of every way. So, 15, 20 years ago, they started coming out with the multi-space meters, right? Blew everyone's minds. You have these parking meters there that can surface, 10, 15 spaces at a time. And a lot of communities jumped on the bandwagon and got them. And, even places like San Francisco did so to a certain extent, and they realized, gosh, there's some downsides to this, whether it be having to take there was pay and display, where you have to take the ticket and put it on your windshield. Those still exist. They still have the pay by license plate, so you have to go in, you have to plug in your license plate, and then it will understand that's there. San Francisco, actually, and other cities went the reverse way and said, people are so annoyed at having to walk down the block and oftentimes not know that the parking meter was there, that they actually went back to the single head parking meters. Also because those parking meters came down in cost, they were a few $100s a pop, so it actually became much more economically viable. So you have those three options. You also have pay by app now, which eliminates, frankly, the need for some of this infrastructure. But then again, does everyone have the app to pay, right? So nothing is a silver bullet there. And like I said, they're all going to come with their pros and cons. But again, for example, the paying with an app is sleek, technologically fancy. I would probably use it. But again, some people might not have it. Other people might like the post in the ground. Other people might not, because it creates kind of a wall of parking meters. So again, I don't. When you say what's the latest and greatest, I think there's a lot of great technology out there and a lot of options that we didn't have before to kind of, if the city went down that road, to weigh what's important to it. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Fair to say that all those technologies, though, rely on some kind of enforcement in order to be effective?
Yes, well, everything relies on enforcement at the end of the day, right? So it's when you have time limits right now, most things don't become as effective if it's not enforced. Typically, though, when you do have paid parking, it's much more common to see enforcement because you can actually pay for enforcement at that point. And there's also, I think, a more common understanding among motorists that when you don't pay for something, there's a likelihood that someone will be actually watching you, whereas with a time limit, it's often maybe yes, maybe no. But again, that's a perception issue.
Do you know if there's some iteration of paid parking that generates more voluntary compliance than maybe a different form of paid parking? Is there a preferred, or is it just really dependent on the variables of the community or the district?
It really depends on the district in the area there. And again, you know, I will say this, when it comes to enforcement, the idea of enforcement is you're doing it to get compliance, for people to follow the law. The intent is not to be punitive, right? At that point, you're actually causing a problem for the downtown, because people will say, gosh, you know, I got a ticket, I didn't even know these parking meters were here, I'm never coming back again. And similarly to the other gentleman's comment about privacy, you know, we did include in our report, for example, the SFMTA has their own privacy policy on how, you know, if you're using license plate recognition or have to enter license plates, they have an official policy about what they do with that data or can do with that data. So these are, you know, legitimate concerns and would need to be addressed.
Thank you.
I have some comments and a follow-up to the questions that you were just asked about existing parking meter technology. I actually end up using parking meters in both San Francisco and the East Bay with some regularity. So I've had all kinds of experiences with the different kinds you just mentioned. And the one thing that I was thinking about when you were talking was, is there a system where you buy 2 hours worth of parking and that that 2 hours is up, that there's a notification to somebody that the meter on parking space 31 is now expired. So you don't need somebody driving around. They know that 31 is already expired. Does that exist?
That is absolutely correct. You can do that too. And so eventually you do need someone to actually come and issue a citation. So
Yeah.
you don't necessarily need to be always clocking the license plates. The level of enforcement and the type of enforcement you have is going to be contingent upon the type of technology that you have at all those spaces, right? So if you have that ability to notify someone that your time is up, then yeah, you don't have to have them circling around. I will say similarly, you do have the ability with the new payment technology today to say, oh, I'm at a restaurant. It can notify me, oh, you have 15 minutes left on your meter. Would you like to add more? And I can do it from my phone. So I don't have to go running back to the meter. And, you know, we didn't explore it here because, frankly, park meters are more phase 2 strategies. But if you do go down that path, I mean, I would recommend, what I recommend with clients is if you were going to do parking meters, don't have time limits. Simply say people can stay as long as they want if they're willing to pay the money. And so that doesn't discourage people, doesn't get people trying to leave before the time limits are up.
Well, the ones that I've been using, you can only buy 2 hours worth of time. When maybe you could come back and buy some more time. I haven't tried that. But the other thought or observation I would have is that parking rates have gotten huge since the advent of these kind of meters where you can stick in your debit card. Now, it's not unusual to spend $5 for street parking in Oakland or San Francisco. And I just think about the amount of revenue we would generate with that kind of thing if you had what did you call it, a benefit district. It's just something to think about. I mean, honestly, I think people are dropping so much money when they come to Sonoma, the tourists, the people that live here like myself. I never park on the plaza and come to the weekend. You'd have to be out of your mind. Why would you even subject yourself to that? I don't even drive downtown. I drive around downtown. So anyway, but back to the revenue generation and the downtown district, I would think that should be looked at just as as something that might change the equation in terms of that. I too had less involvement than Larry with the parking, but when I was on the council from 2006 to 2014, a lot of the same issues still being discussed. At that point in time, I took it upon myself to comment about the East Napa Street lot having 5 spaces or 6 spaces that are taken all the time by businesses that have vans. And those people went nuts when I did that. I did it in a public hearing. And they're still there to this day. You go to that parking lot, those same white vans from the bakery are still there. So, you know, we need to figure something out there. That's like 5 spaces that never get used. And there's some residents, 10, there's some residents that live around that don't have parking where they live. They park in there too. I happen to know that. So, one thing that I've always, and I assume this goes along with what Larry said, the property owners don't want it, but I look at that B of A lot, it's always empty. I mean, who goes in a bank anymore? They have this enormous lot, empty. I park in there anyway, just my point. You got a wasted parking opportunity, unless you got somebody out here,
Can I go?
I've been even known to go in the bank and out the other side. Because we need parking, and they've got this lot. It needs to be used. So I don't know what, what they're thinking. See, maybe it's the 70s thing. I went to college at Berkeley, so that's how I ended up parking the B of A lot. But nonetheless, the other thing that occurs to me is the Vets Hall. If you Google mapped the Vets Hall, or Google Earthed it on here, it's enormous.
Both sides of First and East.
Yeah.
Because on East side, you've got the big lot too, First Street East.
Yeah.
So you got both sides.
Yeah. So if we somehow were able to, the county owns that land, but I understand there's agreements with the veterans that restrict the county's ability to do various things, but that ought to really be explored, as there must be some way to make that a win-win to have more parking. And during the early parts of the pandemic, there were a number of folks who sadly were parking there, were living in the Veterans Hall parking lot. And I got rousted out of there. They're not there anymore, because I do walk through there from time to time. So anyway, I think we should look at revisit the B of A, look at the Veterans Hall, look at the higher tech parking meters, and then lastly, I think the carrying capacity is a very valid concept here. I mean, if you polled, I don't think I'm unique in terms of not going downtown on the weekend because it's like Disneyland. Why would you want to do that? And so, you know, in a part of me says, if we're at carrying capacity where we can support all these businesses, and we residents are willing to put up with not having to go there, that's not really such a bad thing. And if you create more parking, now your roads, you're going to be jammed up. Try driving across the plaza on either Napa Street, Spain Street's out of the question on the weekends because everybody is trying to park. On Napa Street, at least, they're not, because there's that 3-way intersection with, where Broadway comes in, and the horseshoe's right there. But it is crowded. It is really crowded driving through there during busy times. So increasing the parking is going to exacerbate that problem. You've got a city that was laid out for horse and buggies, for a small population. You can only bootstrap so many more things in that downtown area and have it work. And I think we're probably pretty close to it right now. So there's some new things, hotels and such, that are being proposed, and we'll see how all that plays out. But I do think that the parking issues have, in a way, allowed Sonoma to sort of self-regulate itself at a sustainable level.
I'm happy to speak to some of these things.
Okay.
Are you done with your comments? I didn't interrupt.
Well, let me see. Yes. I have one thing I'll bring up at the end. It doesn't relate to what you're doing.
Okay. I was just taking notes here because some of the things I think are great points that you raise. So kind of going back in the order in which you raised them. The paid parking, for example, and the cost of paid parking. Absolutely. If you go to San Francisco or Oakland, any major city, the cost of parking is going to be extraordinarily high on street because the amount of demand that you have for the supply available is extraordinary. And they price according to demand. And so in this area, if you were to pursue that in downtown Sonoma, the prices would not be that high, simply because you don't generate that level of demand. However, if the goal really was to charge primarily tourists who are here, which is not such a bad idea. Tourists are coming from far away. If they had to pay a few bucks for parking, it's not like they're going to go driving away, right? They're already here and they're going to pay. So if you were to charge more, I'm sure it would be during certain key hours like this, like on the weekends, where people really would pay more. But it is a great source of revenue, not going to lie. But again, the reason for paid parking is not to generate revenue. We do it as a park and demand management measure. And the idea is that you can use those revenues and reinvest it back in the area that's generating them to help benefit it. In terms of shared parking agreements, I know Commissioner Barnett brought this up as well with the shared parking agreements and a lot of skepticism around it, which I completely understand. Most communities that have tried this in the past have failed miserably at it because people simply, like you said, they don't want the liability issues. They don't see the point in it. It just seems like a giant headache. That's why, I know the parking manager for the city of Sacramento, Matt Ironman, is a genius when it comes to this sort of stuff.
So how has he been able to do it then? Do you know?
Yes, I do actually. In fact, I have actually all the copies of his agreements with the different lot owners too. Not all of them, several of them. But the way he approaches it is he says, look, how can I make it worth your while? What do you want to see? And lot owners say, well, I want liability covered. Sure, done. We'll do that. I want money. Okay, we can do that too. And whatever and so he brokers individual agreements with individual lot owners depending on their need, and also only opening those spaces when he needs them. So the lot owner said, I'm only willing to give you my spaces from 6 to 10 p.m. on weeknights. Sure, that works. Okay. Because at the end of the day, being able to pay for liability, and I understand your concern, Commissioner Barnett, about in this culture of litigation that we live in, it's a real issue. But it's, he's managed to do it, and granted it's a larger city, but he's done it on a very large scale. And it's significantly cheaper to pay someone a certain fee, for example, to open their parking up for a portion of the day or days, rather than trying to construct new parking. So it's, again, but I also completely respect, you also have to take into account the culture of the area and what people are willing to do. Some people, I'm from Marin County, I know there are people there who have had their properties for decades and who would be very hesitant to share their properties. At the same time, I actually know of a property in downtown Mill Valley that shares their parking. And when it comes to shared parking, oftentimes it's those local property owners that are going to be the ones who are most willing to do it. Because when you try to deal with B of A, with Chase Bank, especially with a lot of the banks, they're very loath to do it because they have to handle that on a more of a regional or national level. They normally can't handle it at the branch level. So I absolutely agree with you. It drives me absolutely batty to see these banks and they're empty, but they're more challenging to deal with. The Vets Hall, sorry, I'm kind of going through my list here. In terms of the Vets Hall, that wasn't part of our study initially here because it wasn't part of the 2017 study, and I don't know the reasoning behind it because I wasn't there at the time. But it's absolutely something that's come up in conversation. I believe it came up in conversation with the council as well. So we can certainly look at that as a viable option. It definitely is a little bit more remote, but it's a great resource of parking. And lastly, in terms of the carrying capacity.
Hang on, can we just belabor that point?
Yep.
Yes, we are to report back, and we were asked to mention that to your commission about using the vets. And also, was this shuttles as well, Brian, that you were talking about?
They had mentioned the possibility of shuttles, about raising that as a possibility. And shuttles are something we can consider as part of the study, but they are also expensive to run. And you actually do have a downtown that's largely walkable. So if we were to look at shuttles, I would want to make sure that it's actually worth your while and that remote lots are far enough away to make it work.
Should your commission say, yeah, look at it, Brian, we can have Brian take a look at it and then report back to you in December or however long it takes to do that. I don't know how long it would take.
Let's go ahead and finish discussion. Mr. Willers, I'm sure would like to talk.
I'm going to go back 30 years and hopefully look forward 30 years. 30 years ago, I lived on the plaza. 50% of the parking spaces were taken up by the people who worked on the plaza. Nothing's really changed. They loathe the idea of being told that they can't park in front of where they work. So So the businesses don't complain, I believe, is because they get free parking adjacent to their business, which they see not taking away their business, but the other businesses see it taking away their business. So it's an interesting dichotomy here that we have going on. I also agree with Larry very much about the carrying capacity. I think when you, in cars in general, when you increase the pipe and you increase the reservoir to carry the volume the pipe gives you, that ultimately that reservoir and that pipe overflow and flood. And our community is of a nature that I don't believe it has an ultimate growing capacity much beyond what it is already. It may be able to get denser to serve its residents, but it really doesn't have a capacity that's going to handle a significantly larger volume of tourists without a negative impact. So the idea of creating larger parking lots and then having to bring the people in on the larger streets to fill up the larger parking lots to then overcrowd the plaza, to me is insanity. And you know, I think we have enough parking, quite honestly, and I think it works. People may not get the parking lot, the parking space they want, but if they're willing to venture out a block or maybe a block and a half, they'll definitely get one. The idea of the Vets building serving as an overflow reservoir and a shuttle being able to bring someone back, having just gone from or come back from one of the automobile capitals of the world, Abu Dhabi, and going to the Louvre Museum, their parking lot is, you know, might as well be a mile away from the museum. And it's huge, and they shuttle people back and forth because it's excruciatingly hot, back and forth in oversized golf carts. And that's, you know, that's a reasonable way to bring 10 people at a time to a destination, and especially if they're only a quarter of a block or a block away. So I think the Vets building offers that opportunity for the overflow in the weekends as a way to re-signal the loss of parking at Casa Grande, which would then definitely impact the downtown area. That, you know, Casa Grande being closed to paid parking, you may as well give up those 15% that's remaining on the plaza, because it's just not gonna, people aren't gonna park there until they're forced to. 30 years from now, I actually do believe that we're not gonna have as many cars that have single or double person occupancy having to have parking places. I believe that will be delivered to our destination and will be taken back in a much more convenient and accessible way than an automobile. And a lot of people in that generation will probably utilize that. So if we overbuild parking now, we're going to find that we're going to be, you know, cursing ourselves in the future. So I think that we ought to look at the ways to explore to make people pay for the parking as a way of competing with the loss of Casa Grande. Because as soon as the state determines their parking fee, they've essentially determined your parking fee. And so you can charge as much as they charge. And if you want the public to park in Casa Grande, you charge a little more. And you know, I think that's a great way to raise revenue. I think there's other ways to use revenue related to the automobile in the downtown area. The downtown district is already a defined area in our general plan. We might as well use that as the downtown parking area also, and consider revenue sources for it and how to use them. It may not just be to service automobiles.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I know you're going to be speaking last on the topic perhaps. So my mind is kind of going to let's do nothing until the state decides to do paid parking. But between now and then, we come up with a strategy to implement such that the day after they implement paid parking, we come up with twice the price to encourage people to go to Casa Grande to park. I'm thinking that maybe what we do is we ask, and that's tongue in cheek, by the way, what we could do between now and the next meeting is we could have Brian look at strategies to implement should the state move to a paid parking strategy such that we're not kind of waiting for it to happen before we actually do something.
One thing that I thought about that I didn't mention, and that is, maybe the way, Commissioner Barbos, the way to deal with the 2-hour versus 5-hour parking space is that incrementally, I'm sure this happens in places, but you're in the restaurant, you've already got your 2-hour parking place, you've already enjoyed yourself for 2 hours. Suddenly now your parking place costs twice as much. And so am I going to get up? No, I'm going to continue to have a good time, and I'm going to pay twice as much to sit there. And that's a way of controlling the short term as well as the long term. You raise more revenue over the long term.
Quick. Okay, quick.
I just wanted to say that our daughter and her family lives in San Francisco on 19th Avenue, and we go down there regularly. Like Steve, I use this lot that's near her house. They're at Geary 19th, and there's a lot there that basically limits you to 2 hours, but you can go back and buy another 2 hours and another 2 hours. It isn't automatic. You actually have to physically go there. I set my alarm, and the reason I do that is because the fee for exceeding the parking, if you get a ticket, is $63. And boy, is that an incentive to keep up with that meter.
Jim Moore?
No, I'll reserve.
I think the most relevant comment that's been made this evening is this idea of a carrying capacity. And I want to verbally reemphasize what I think we're about at the sweet spot. So to me, the question is not so much how do we create more parking, but how do we make the most out of what we have? And that would include trying to negotiate possibly some private-public agreements. I got to believe that the guy in Sacramento is not the only one that knows how to sweeten a deal. And I think this is a perfect example where we undoubtedly as commissioners have made life difficult for certain owners around the plaza, which maybe have not put us in the best grace. So maybe if we're really trying to negotiate a win-win, maybe we need to have a better understanding of what's important to them and how we might be able to, be successful working something out. I am amazed again that the mind says the parking is full at 85%. I think the translation is we're kind of lazy, but that's my interpretation. I'm very concerned about Casa Grande going ahead and putting in meters, because I think that will just force us. Because if they put in meters, all that's going to do is motivate those to circle around even more around the plaza, looking for those last few places. Now, this may make no sense, but what if, and I'm not a lover of Sacramento, as everyone knows, what if we try to be creative in our negotiations and say, no, you keep yours free, we'll put the meters in, and we'll split some of the money so that you can begin looking at funding whatever this artifacts place is. But to me, I just I'm not excited about their threat of metering it in 2023. I also am disappointed that if the retailers around the plaza they identify parking as being so valuable, but they are ineffectual in telling their employees, no, you can't park out there. We need to come up with something. And I'm speculating that if we were to threaten that we're going to put meters in, the retailers are going to squeal like stuck pigs, and maybe we give them another opportunity to do more effective control of where their employees park. I don't know. I think, too, that our signage is okay, but I think we can improve the signage, particularly if we incorporate the word free. So I'll just reiterate the fact that I think the most salient point is the fact that I think you've heard we have capacity. How do we maintain it? There might be a little wiggle room there, but how can we be more efficient with how we manage what we've got? And I will give my fellow commissioners a second round, provided they keep it short.
Mr. Chair, if I can, just a recommendation for next steps. As we recap, Brian's been taking copious notes. We can return at the meeting in December 15th, I think it is, and summarize the commission's comments, tasking with looking at the veterans lot, looking at the possibility of shuttles, but to also have you as commissioners look at the Christmas tree exhibit that he had, so that we could then, formulate a set of what we want as a commission to forward to the city council at some point.
I like that, and then I want to go back to what your earlier recommendation was. That is, if the metering of Casa Grande is inevitable, then we need to get our act together and figure out how we're going to counter that, so that when that day comes, we'll have something that we can enact that will hopefully minimize the impact of metering Casa Grande. I see one lone hand in the public, but because this is my last commission, I'll break from tradition and allow the public person to come forward if he wishes to speak briefly.
Thank you. It's a little frustrating to want to say stuff and not be able to. I think with the veterans lot, that's a complete false hope. Those guys are completely uncooperative about everything, and so I wouldn't pin any hopes on those guys whatsoever. Just forget about it up front, because they're not going to do anything. And I think that just a comment on the idea of carrying capacity is that's a sustainability concept, and so that's shown on an S-curve graph, and then you have a J-curve graph where the J-curve goes up and it crashes. But the carrying capacity concept goes with sustainability and triple bottom line sustainability. So I think that as planners, you would want to look at the whole city ecosystem and not just parking, and the city would need an economic policy, social policy, and environmental policy, so that the whole idea of carrying capacity shouldn't just be applied to parking and on some idea of the economics of the plaza, but it should be part of a larger sustainability policy that the city could have as an integral planning policy. And so that's just a thought on that.
Thank you, Fred. Now I'll close. Thought I was going to close. Mr. Frank, you too may have equal time. Brief equal time.
Yeah, please. Robert Frank again, Larkin Drive. And Steve, Commissioner Steve, what you were talking about was basically equilibrium. Having achieved that equilibrium is the point I was trying to make with our 20264 bellwether, where our numbers have remained constant for about 10 years, if not longer. So, you're right. We're there. And part of that equilibrium equation is our ability to get out of town as we wait, starting at the Shell Vista Firehouse down there. I mean, it is maddening. And here's the thing, is that still the case? Half of the plaza parking is utilized by employees? Wow. That's the breakthrough logic right there. I had the same problem at our joint down there on Broadway, and I just simply explained to the employees that your interest is the same as ownership interest. How else can we facilitate your pay raises, other perks and benefits? So I ended up using it as a wage negotiating point. End of problem. Because the employees will be privy. They'll have privy information about alternate parking. I think that's about it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm closing the public session. I'm actually closing the commissioner's section. I would like to carry on.
Just one quick comment. The point that Mr. Alabak made about the Veterans Hall is not lost on staff. We did discuss that with council, and Councilmember Lowe said, notwithstanding that, let me know what the problems are with the county staff, and I'll go talk to Supervisor Gorin. So That's part of the deliberation, and we'll report back, and we'll come back with additional information.
Very good, thank you. So now, we're going to go on to issues update, and I expect something from you, Mr. Storr, if this is going to be your last issues update.
I actually don't have anything tonight.
Fine.
Now we get to council member comments.
Now we get to comments from the commission.
Well, I'm going to take a moment to congratulate you on being elected to the city council, to also offer you my condolences, because it is a very challenging job. To thank you for your service to the commission, which I think has been splendid. And you have modeled an approach of courtesy, respect, and professionalism as the chair. And it's been a fine example, not just to the rest of us, but to the general conduct and decorum of meetings in general. And so I thank you for that. And I also want to say that I think it's excellent that you will be able to bring to the city council your direct experience on the planning commission as it pertains to all the work that we do and the land use things that we deal with. It's going to be an opportunity for you to teach members of the council who have no experience in that area about all the depth of the considerations that have to come to bear on making land use and development decisions. And so it's both an opportunity and a great responsibility that you'll have to be a teacher. And but I know you'll do very well, and I want to thank you and tell you how much I've appreciated working with you.
Thank you. I hate to say it, but this is one of the few times I wish Larry would continue.
Well, I'll say ditto, so that's twice as much right there. It's been a pleasure serving with you, Ron. The way that you run a meeting is a good example, and I hope you take it to the city council. The idea that the public is limited to 3 minutes, but often needs a little bit more time to express themselves is a valid thing in our community. And so I've really appreciated your handling of meetings that way. And I can only wish you good luck.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Wyrie?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo what everybody else is saying. The type of service, Ron, that you've given the city is the type that unfortunately you don't see as consistently as maybe you once did in towns like Sonoma. And I think yours is one to be modeled after. Your service is something to be modeled after. Your dedication and your leadership has meant a lot to me, especially as I have taken on this steep learning curve of some of the more technical aspects of planning. And I appreciate everything you've done. So congratulations and thank you.
You're not obligated, Steve.
I know that. Well, they've said just about all the great things that could be said, except I do want to stress that I think you are going to bring to the council a perspective of someone who's lived in this town a long time. And that is useful. And it's very useful because not everybody has, and not all your constituents have. And so I think it's useful to share those, your insights and your experience looking back as you start to try to solve the problems we have today and will downstream. And I'm just going to repeat, I love the way you run these meetings and the way you treat your fellow commissioners and the public. It's not always the easiest thing to be in that position. I hated being mayor because I had to speak last. You know, I mean, I like being mayor for a lot of other reasons, but I didn't like that part of it. But you handled that part very well, and so it's been a real pleasure. Thank you. And Mr. Storr, sail off into the sunset of soccer. You're back on. World Cup. Yes, thank you for your time.
Two things. One is I do want to actually speak, and I'm sorry that my other fellow commissioners aren't here, because one of the things that has made my job, I'll say easier, but also wanting to put in the effort, is that we've had a very, I think, wonderful diversity of personalities and talents and backgrounds that have led to good discussions and have led to, I think, some good actions. And I am hoping that when the new commission is reconstituted now with the new council, that I will be successful in trying to emphasize how well the old machine worked, and not necessarily advocating that we replicate the exact old machine, albeit I'd be happy. But we really do need to look for that kind of richness of diversity and personality and experiences, because that to me has been a real joy to kind of encourage, but sit back and listen to the dialogue back and forth. And again, I want to thank each of you for that opportunity, because it made my job very enjoyable. And I'd also like to speak briefly to our director. Thank you. It's been, I think, a journey for me, being both planning and chair for a while, that I've appreciated. I've appreciated your professionalism. I think one of the things that we shouldn't underestimate is the value of public people having private experience, because I've always felt that that has brought a richer perspective of what may be the best approach or what may be the best recommendation. So, David, I thank you for that. I thank you for taking a rather dull subject called planning and making it a little bit more interesting. And I believe I can speak for all five of us. We wish you the very best, and hope that you're not a stranger to Sonoma going forward. And lastly, because I'm a believer in expressing my appreciation, the young woman that just walked in the back has brought in something that represents something that's very important to me, and that is a business here in town called Sweet Scoops. I have a ice cream cake and some plates and some forks and some spoons that I would like to have my bride come forward and help me chop and serve and have that be a very tangible way of saying thank you. It's been fun. So.
Awesome.
Meeting adjourned.